Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. We'll begin in just a minute. All right, my name is Rachel Mooney. I'm a manager with the Climate Action Reserve. Thank you all for attending the scoping webinar for the development of the U.S. early plugging of marginal oil and gas wells protocol. I want to begin by passing it off to Robin Ricks, the president of the Climate Action Reserve, to say a few words.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Robin Ricks, and I have the honor of serving as president of the Climate Action Reserve, one of the world's leading independent crediting programs for greenhouse gas emission reductions and removals. On behalf of the Reserve, I'd like to formally welcome you to today's webinar, which marks the next step in our process to develop a protocol for the early plugging of marginal oil and gas wells in the United States. The Reserve's vision is a world cooperating to solve climate change at speed and at scale. And we achieve this vision, in other words, our mission. It's really to develop and implement trusted market-based programs to advance climate action for people and planet. This protocol is a reflection of that vision and mission. For a variety of factors, some economic and some social, there are a large number of oil and gas wells in the world, including in the United States, that produce really negligible amounts of energy, but also produce a disproportionately high amount of emissions. In the ongoing absence of regulation or under-regulation to address these emissions, the Reserve wants to step up and seeks to step up and provide an incentive for these wells to be capped and for these emissions to fall at speed and at scale. My colleagues, including Mackenzie Smith, Rachel Mooney, and Jordan Mao, are leading on this initiative. But this initiative will also require your active participation. Thank you for being here today, and please do get involved in our consultation and work group, and please do lend your expertise to this important process. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Robin. So for today's webinar, all attendees are going to be in listen-only mode. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please add them to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to answer them at the end. Any questions not addressed, we'll be able to follow up with you after the meeting via email. All webinar slides and the recording are going to be available on the protocol development webpage shortly after the end of the webinar. My colleague Jordan Mao has put in a link to the website so you can refer to that later. So I'm going to begin with an introduction to the team that's going to be leading the development of this protocol. So my colleague Mackenzie Smith, Associate Director, will be leading the protocol development process with support from myself and my colleague Jordan Mao, Senior Associate. And the initial drafting of the protocol and some technical support has been provided by Climate Wells in collaboration with the Rocky Mountain Institute, Eco Engineers, and Netherlands Sewell and Associates. So the purpose of today's webinar is to announce the development of the U.S. early plugging of marginal oil and gas wells protocol. We will be soliciting participation from interested stakeholders in the development process, either as an active member to participate on the work group or as an observer. And we'll also seek feedback on key considerations for protocol development. So I'll begin today with an introduction to the Climate Action Reserve, who we are and what we do, and share how we develop protocols and the anticipated timelines. And then I'll pass it off to Mackenzie, who will discuss the key components of the protocol, and then we'll open up the floor for your questions and comments, and then follow up with next steps. So, who is the Climate Action Reserve? We're the most trusted, efficient, and experienced carbon credit registry for global carbon markets. A pioneer in carbon accounting, the reserve promotes and fosters the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions through credible market-based policies and solutions. As a high-quality carbon credit registry for voluntary carbon markets, we establish rigorous standards involving multi-sector stakeholder workgroup development and local engagement, and we issue carbon credits in a transparent and publicly accessible system. We're active across the world with protocols available in North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean, as well as China, and currently developing a protocol for use in India. The organization also supports compliance carbon markets in California, Washington, and internationally. And under our protocols, we issue climate reserve tons or CRTs into the voluntary carbon market, which are issued under our transparent public registry platform. And we will also develop accounting tools and trainings to support our stakeholders. The reserve has 30 protocols across 8 countries and are currently developing 3 new protocols in 2 new countries. We have an interactive map on our website that highlights our projects on our registry, including the 1,157 projects that are either listed, registered, or completed. And our program has issued over 141 million credits and 104 million credits for use in the California and Washington compliance programs. We have 8 active protocols in the industrial sector with 2 new protocols in development. One for nitric acid production in India that's already under development, as well as today's protocol, the early plugging of marginal oil and gas wells. Our US and China adipic acid protocols and the US Article 5 ozone depleting substances protocols have all been evaluated by the Integrity Council of the Voluntary Carbon Market, or the ICVCM, and are recognized for being of high quality and have received the Core Carbon Principles label, or CCP. Within the industrial sector, we have 7 active nitric acid production projects, 5 active adipic acid production projects, and 11 low carbon cement projects, and have issued over 42 million credits within the industrial sector. So now that I've told you who we are, I will cover how we develop our protocols and the timeline for the process. The reserve creates jurisdictional specific protocols with a standardized greenhouse gas accounting method. We assess common practice in each jurisdiction with expert stakeholders in the region during the protocol development process. So essentially, we're doing the validation process during the development, and we outline eligibility and additionality criteria. Because we take this approach, we're able to provide standardized greenhouse gas quantification and monitoring requirements for each project. As a result, our process minimizes personal judgment by all individuals involved in project assessment and provides stability and certainty to project developers and investors because they can review the protocol and know if their project would be eligible or know how to develop their project to ensure eligibility. So by not requiring a validation process, it also removes the costs associated with a validation body review. The reserve develops protocols to ensure that all credits issued are of high quality, and we do so by assessing additionality criteria so that all emission reductions being credited would not have occurred in absence of the carbon market. So we're crediting above business as usual scenarios for that project type and within the industry. They're all verifiable, so they go through an independent third-party verification process after the project's reporting period by reviewing all documents and calculations prior to issuance. All credits are real, conservative calculations based on project-specific data during the reporting period. They're permanent, so reductions and removals must persist for 100 years in the case of forest, or permanent or permanent, like through the destruction of emissions, like for our livestock or ozone depleting substances protocols. Finally, we have mechanisms in place to ensure that all projects are compliant with our programmatic requirements. So this protocol will be developed under our new modular approach. So a modular protocol will consist of a base protocol that would cover the common guidance for the project type, and that would be shared across jurisdictions. It would also have a complementary jurisdictional standard, so the protocol can be tailored to the jurisdiction during protocol development. So projects would be listed under both a base protocol as well as an accompanying jurisdictional standard. So the intent of this new method is to maintain our jurisdictional approach and assess common practice in each country while streamlining future development. We'll also be able to expand eligibility to new jurisdictions in a shorter time period by focus on adapting the base protocol for use within that country. As a result, we'll be able to expand our impact by reducing emissions from oil and gas in other countries. While we are using a new modular approach, we will be following our standard protocol development process steps as we do with our other protocols. So the process starts today with this webinar and will directly lead into the formation of the technical work group, which will take place over the next few weeks. Then we'll go into the revisions of the protocol and the work group process, which will consist of a series of meetings and reviews of draft materials. After the work group meetings, we will have a 30-day public comment period, which will allow for additional comments on the draft protocol by any and all stakeholders wishing to submit comment on that draft. After the 30 days, we will make any necessary revisions to develop a final version of the protocol, and we'll publish our responses to all of the comments that we receive, and then we will propose a final draft to the reserves board for adoption. We estimate the entire process will take roughly 3 to 6 months, but it depends on the complexity of the changes required to meet the context of the jurisdiction and the project activity. So we have two opportunities for external participation. The first is to participate as an observer. So by submitting the stakeholder engagement form, you'll receive notifications from us of when new information becomes available. So this will include when we schedule work group meetings for which you can join as an observer. Any stakeholders that are not on the technical work group can also listen in on work group meetings, but are not vocal active participants in the work group deliberations. After meetings, we'll share notes, slides, and the meeting recording online, and we'll periodically have drafts available as well, which includes the public comment draft where anyone can submit comments for our consideration. And you'll also receive a notification of when public comment webinar is held, for which you can also attend. It will cover the protocol in detail. We will also update the website and send notifications when the protocol is presented to the board and when it's finalized and approved. This form is available throughout the entirety of the development process. It can be completed at any time, and it is available on the protocol development webpage. For stakeholders that are interested in participating in the technical work group, we have a statement of interest form that's available for you to complete. So those that have relevant experience and are interested in participating in the development process can submit that form. We strive to construct a work group with balanced representation from those within the oil and gas sector, project developers, environmental organizations, verification bodies, consultants, academia, and government. However, each organization may only have one representative participating during the work group meetings, but may also designate an alternate who may serve in their place if they're unable to attend, and they're also welcome to confer within their organization. The statement of interest form is available on the protocol development webpage and is due by 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Monday, December 1st. Mackenzie will provide more details on specific timelines. However, we're aiming to form the work group in early December. And those not participating in the work group will still be able to participate as an observer and provide public comment. So after forming the work group, we will solicit feedback from those work group members on key protocol criteria from the work group and revise the protocol based on that feedback. So we'll hold work group meetings via webinar about 2 or 3 times, roughly 1 to 2 hours each, but maybe more depending on how many meetings are necessary. Work group members will be expected to review and provide feedback on proposed protocol elements in these meetings, as well as through written comments. Anyone applying to join the technical work group should be willing and able to participate in all work group meetings, which will be held this winter and possibly into the spring if necessary. Ideal work group members will have a familiarity or experience within the oil and gas industry within the US, be project developers, verification bodies, NGOs, or other stakeholders that have an understanding or experience with project-based greenhouse gas accounting. Interested stakeholders are encouraged to submit that statement of interest form as we will strive to represent each sector equally. And now I will pass it over to Mackenzie, who will talk about some of the key considerations for development.
Amazing. Thanks, Rachel. And thanks everyone for joining. We're very excited to be kicking off this scoping webinar. My name is Mackenzie Smith. I'm an Associate Director of the Climate Action Reserve, as Rachel mentioned, and I'll be leading the development of this protocol for oil and gas wells in the US. I will walk through some key considerations for protocol development, but at the top of this, want to remind everyone that we will be diving into a lot of these considerations in more detail during the technical work group process, and this is really an introduction to some of the components that we'll be reviewing and discussing as a part of our process. I'm not sure if I can advance the slides, Rachel. Okay. Good before. Thank you. So for a bit of background, I'm sure most of you on the call are familiar with marginal wells or the practice of plugging wells. So background, aging oil and gas wells emit an increasing amount of methane, which is obviously a problem and why we're discussing this protocol and action. I will say there are different types of wells and different definitions. There are marginal wells that we're talking about here today, but there are also orphaned or abandoned wells, which are generally not producing wells. Those also emit methane or are of interest to us, but we have decided to first look at marginal wells and then look at orphaned and abandoned wells after development of this protocol. Marginal wells defined by the EPA produce less than 15 barrels of oil equivalent per day or 90,000 cubic feet of natural gas per day over a 12-month period. So that is the definition we're working with from the EPA. Obviously, we can review that with the work group and further define it as needed. These wells there are about 700,000 marginally productive wells across the country that interestingly and importantly provide less than 6% of energy production, but over 50% of the methane emissions. So we feel there's a real place for us and our work to reduce those emissions. Early plugging of these marginal wells can reduce insignificant greenhouse gas emission reductions and keep hydrocarbons underground while not jeopardizing production of energy. Of course, that would be discussed further under leakage considerations in protocol development. Eligibility requirements, I'll go through a few of those. The first being project definition. Again, I put considerations at the bottom of a few of these slides, which are just as they are considerations. I will introduce them, but we'll note that these will be topic types that the technical work group will discuss in more detail. Right now, our working project definition is the avoidance of production-associated greenhouse gas emissions from marginal oil and gas wells by decommissioning or early decommissioning and plugging these wells and keeping hydrocarbons underground. I won't get into the details of what that is, but is obviously decommissioning the well and filling it with cement or other materials and plugging the well so that hydrocarbons and methane are emitted. That would be further defined, of course, in the protocol. The baseline scenario assumes that these marginal wells would have continued to operate until they reach their economic limit. So even if they are marginally providing an economic benefit, they would continue to produce and therefore continue to emit GHG emissions. And so the baseline is just that, and the project would be plugging, as mentioned, plugging the oil and gas well that's marginally producing and therefore reducing and eliminating the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from that well. A few considerations that I'll highlight, but as noted, we will discuss in more detail during the work group process. Marginal production, what does that mean? Do we have the right definition? Do we have the right definition of production volumes? And basically which wells in the US would be eligible under this protocol, meaning that active wells that are producing more than that would not be eligible, or under this protocol, things like orphaned and abandoned wells wouldn't be eligible. So trying to find that exact definition for what wells would be eligible under this protocol, that would be reviewed and further discussed. Recoverable reserves certified by a professional firm. So is there some sort of amount that a well has to show in terms of what reserves they have in terms of production or emissions? And then also, is there a technical permanence review, meaning does there need to be some sort of assessment of the well that plugging can take place and provide certainty in the plugging performance? Can I advance them? Sorry, Rachel, I don't know. Next slide, I guess. Thank you. Project ownership, as with all of our protocols, we have what is defined by the project developer. In this case, or in all cases, I should say, it's the entity with the active account on the reserve registry and is responsible for project reporting and verification. Generally, for our industrial protocols, this can be a number of entities or individuals, whether it's the facility owner or an entity that specializes in project development, a technology supplier, or other groups. However, in all cases, they must be able to demonstrate clear ownership of the GHG emission reduction rights. They must be able to establish clear and explicit title and have the authority to sign our attestation of title form. Some considerations for this protocol are questions such as should or can the project developer be the oil and gas well operator, or should it be a third party? Why or why not? Can the entity that owns the project be a oil and gas company, or should it be someone that privately owns these wells or inherited them? Why or why not? And regardless of the project developer, should there be some sort of independence between the project developer and the oil and gas operator or owner? Again, why or why not? And what kind of conflict of interest areas should be reviewed? So again, considerations to be further discussed with the technical work group. Slide, thanks. So we do have our eligibility rules listed. These are within all of our protocols. They include location, project start date, project crediting period, importantly, additionality, of course, and regulatory compliance. As you can imagine, I'll go into a bit more detail on a few of these areas. The first three generally are pretty straightforward. We will review them as needed with the work group, but are pretty straightforward. Location would be in the US and its tribal lands and territories. We may need to review in more detail how tribal lands are relate to this protocol in terms of where the marginal wells are located in the country. Project start date would be typically no more than 12 months prior to project submission. That is based on our other protocols and definitions, but could be reviewed. The project crediting period, as like with all our industrial protocols, is typically defined as 10 years. and then may be renewed one time if still eligible for a total lifespan of 20 years. Again, we can review that based on the protocol details. Additionality, our additionality tests include our performance standard tests, meaning that it cannot be business as usual or must yield a surplus of reductions absent of the carbon project and not legally required. So it can't be legally required in any state or federal law. And regulatory compliance, pretty self-explanatory that the project is in compliance with all applicable laws. So within the work group, we would review what laws those may be for this practice type. For additionality, we have a few considerations and notes. Like I said, it must be additional, so it must yield a surplus of what would not have occurred or would have occurred without the carbon project. It must satisfy the following tests. So we have a performance standard test, which in this case is a practice-based threshold. So what would be common practice? So we would assess marginal wells and how likely it is for early plugging to occur, whether at a national or state level, and take that into consideration, as well as a legal requirement test. So assessing if any state or region is legally requiring the early plugging of marginal wells, and also take that into consideration when determining eligibility of projects in this standardized fashion. Some other considerations that we may look at are the potential for different tests, like a lock-in risk test, which is basically that this would not extend the operational life or increase emissions, but guarantee that operations would end and emissions would be reduced. What kind of test could, assure that? A financial viability test. We could look at the ongoing revenue of the marginally producing well in comparison to the potential carbon credits that would be provided or the capital costs that would go into plugging the oil and gas well early. So that is a consideration that we could review. And also credit stacking. Is there other finances coming to provide additional payments to achieve this activity? And is stacking allowed and in what context? Regulatory compliance, not surprising that our projects, as all our protocols denote, that you must meet all applicable laws, whether it's in air, water quality, or safety. The project must be able to sign an attestation of regulatory compliance at each verification, attesting that they have been in compliance with these laws. They must disclose to us in writing any violations of legal laws that pertain to their project. And a verifier may, if they find a material violation within the project, then credits would not be issued, except for some cases of administration or acts of nature, which would not impact crediting unless it was reoccurring. So this is standard across all of our protocols, including our industrial protocols, and would basically be in our protocol for early plugging of oil and gas wells, but we would do an assessment of what regulatory compliance looks like for these projects and what applicable laws apply to them, either at a state or federal level. Social and environmental safeguards. This is another section of eligibility within our protocol. The social safeguards that we're proposing and be included for this protocol would be labor and safety regulations, as well as a public comment and dispute resolution process. The environmental safeguards would include compliance with any air and water quality regulations, and also to mitigate any potential release of other pollutants. So this again is very standard in our protocols, and we would provide any specifics that need to be considered as it relates particularly to this project. We do also have a social and environmental safeguards form where projects can fill out that they're meeting their safeguards or finding ways to improve. Some considerations that have been raised to date around this project type particularly is soil remediation or environmental remediation that may be required after the well is plugged. Is that part of the project? Is it need to be considered? And would it fall under mitigate pollutants and what that might look like? And of course, we would discuss that further with the technical work group. Next, going into section 4 and then 5 of our protocol format. The first section, section 4 here, is the proposed, or it is the GHG boundary, but in this case it is proposed at this time and would of course be discussed further with the work group. Hopefully you can see the image on the left, which would be modified to our format in terms of including the different sources, sinks, and reservoirs, SSRs, that would be impacted by both the baseline and project. But generally, the GHG assessment boundary would be applicable to CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide alike, and would include SSRs such as a number for the baseline, which include the storage or the reservoir of the hydrocarbons that would be emitted over a certain amount of time. Also, the emissions that could be or would be associated with extracting that oil and gas, any flaring and venting emissions, process and refining, transportation, end user fuel consumption, and also fugitive emissions as well. So that is like a life cycle analysis, as you can imagine, of the normal, marginal well continuing to produce, being extracted and then processed and refined, etc. And so we would look at the entirety of that life cycle analysis and determine what needs to be considered in both a practical and conservative fashion within the GHG boundary for this project type. The plugging of the oil and gas well would be project emissions, and I'll discuss that further on a next slide. But generally, this visual would outline what types of emissions would be compared to determine the emission reduction, or therefore the credits that would be issued on a project basis. So quantification, right now we have left it simply as emission reductions. That's ER equals baseline minus project, which is not surprising. There are other considerations and of course other equations, a series of them that would feed into these parameters and therefore the overall emission reduction quantification and credit issuance. Generally, as I mentioned, the baseline emissions would be based on those different SSRs that were discussed, but would be accounted for by looking at the adjusted economic reserves in some fashion. So what amount of emissions would have been leaked if we did not have the plugging occur? What are the upstream, mainstream, and downstream emissions from production of oil and gas? And also, is there any sort of permanence discount that needs to be considered? So we're being told that there are ways to, plug wells that is 99% efficient. We need to review that, determine if that's the case, and what potentially could impact the storage of hydrocarbons underground and reduced leakage to consider different discount factors. So that would go into the baseline emissions. Interestingly, you'll see that BE has a subscript T, which means over time, and I will discuss that further, I think, on the next slide in a minute. But the project emissions, then there is a conversation that needs to be had around that. There are proposals that project emissions would be set to 0 because the idea is that the plugging would have actually occurred at a later date within the baseline emissions, but we will need to review that to determine if that is meeting different conservativeness requirements and our requirements for our protocol. So there are considerations around would we actually have the projects record and provide the specific actual site emission data from what went into plugging the well, and would that be subtracted from the baseline, or is that too potentially administratively burdensome for the amount of emissions that would be subtracted, and is it better to maybe think of a conservative average of project emissions that would be reduced? So something again that the technical work group will need to review and land on. Two other considerations that we'll need to talk about and add to this equation are a leakage adjustment or discount and an uncertainty adjustment or discount. And those will probably primarily depend on our crediting approach, which I think is the next slide, but will be included in these equations in some fashion. And the crediting approach, this is probably one of the most important slides, although it's, in the middle of my presentation. Right now, I noted that there is a notation in the equation and quantification around timelines or years. And so we do have a few different options in how we may issue credits and the timing of those, and that will be again reviewed by the technical work group. The idea that I'd first like to put forward or discuss and introduce here is that an example maybe between something like a protocol for ozone depleting substances, which we have, versus early plugging of oil and gas wells. This is somewhat similar in the sense that the action happens at the beginning of the project. But as you can imagine, when you're depleting something, you can't really recreate it. And so there isn't that risk that it will be leaked or go to the atmosphere at a different point in time. Where the plugging of an oil and gas well, though there are assurances and ways to check that it is meeting certain standards and requirements, could still potentially lead to different risks of releasing those emissions at a later date. And so, how do we account for that and account for that risk? We have a few different issuance timing options that we're thinking about and want to discuss with the technical work group further. The first option would be potentially to credit all of the emissions upfront at the start of the project. That is what some other protocols have put forward. We have some concerns with that, of course. It does favor economics over risks in that case. On the other side, or on the other side of the coin, there is option two, where we could go to something that we more typically see in our program around an annual crediting approach that obviously favors risks over economics, meaning that there would be a significant upfront cost for projects to plug the well, but they would not see the entirety of that action's credits at the start and rather over an annual period of issuance timing. And then there's obviously some sort of balance. Is there a mechanism to hold or convert credits over time? Is there a different timeline that's not annual, but rather a set number of years? And where can we find the balance between the economics and risk? And just to note that we would also consider potentially a discount for these risks. So even if there are credit approaches that provide credits up front, what kind of discounts could be applied in that case, and would that be more favorable for projects? And regardless of the approach, there would be ongoing monitoring that would be required. Which leads me into the MRV section, monitoring requirements, reporting periods, and verification cycles. This is the last three sections of our protocol framework before we'll open it up for your questions. Not surprisingly, projects need to be monitored, so there needs to be a monitoring plan which puts in all of the details of what the project did. So this could include the different plugging practices that were undertaken, an assessment of the plug effectiveness, as well as the long-term integrity of the plug, some considerations that the technical work group would review of details or data that would support these areas to monitor and document. Could be supporting evidence like photos, logs, as well as certifications or standards, sign off from other bodies that review the effectiveness of the plug and provide their certification on it. Testing techniques and equipment. How is the project monitoring what gases were, being leaked from the oil and gas well before and after the plug, and what kind of techniques and equipment and requirements do they need to maintain, as well as different data collection processes. So again, not surprising, something that's a part of all of our protocols, but will need to be reviewed in detail for this practice type. And again, reporting periods and verification cycles. So typically, or I should say first, by defining a reporting period, that is the length of time that the GHG emission reductions from a project activity are quantified, We're proposing that it would be a maximum of 12 months, which is similar to our other projects and protocols, but could be sub-annual as needed. So this could look like a series of, 3 to 6 to 9 months if a project wanted to do that for whatever reasons to fit their project type. Each reporting period must be verified, as Rachel, I think, already mentioned, and the reporting periods must be continuous. The verification cycle, I'm sure a number of you know, is the length of time over which the emission reductions from the project activity are verified. After um, after the after the initial reporting period, 2 reporting periods may be verified at once. And site visits are also required, as are all of our projects. And ongoing monitoring and site visit timelines would be a consideration that we would discuss for this project type specifically. And verification documents are required to be submitted to the reserve no more than 12 months after the end of the reporting period, which is standard for all of our protocols. And it must undergo our review in order to be registered and issue credits. With that, I thank you for your attention and time for both Rachel's presentation and mine. We hope that this provided you a concise yet thorough outline of our protocol development process, next steps, what you can expect, as well as a brief introduction to some of the questions we will have and discuss further with the technical work group that we convene. With that, I will open it up for questions and comments. I believe we have the chat function or the Q&A function active. I don't see that right now, so I believe Jordan is looking at that and will provide us with the questions and comments that we can answer. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So we can just go down the line with the questions in the Q&A first, I think. So I'll read it out since we can't all see them. What drove the decision to, actually, we're gonna start with the second one. So this is from Hans Shaler. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Are you working with any state agencies on this program? For example, the Energy and Carbon Management Commission of Colorado.
Sure. I don't have any personal contacts with them right now as of our development process, but like everyone, we welcome their collaboration and involvement in our work group. So if we're not connected, we would be happy to. I don't know if that simply answers the question.
Anonymous attendee asks, what is the 10-year renewal period? Why would a project not renew if the well is already plugged?
Renew for the reporting, like the crediting period?
I think that's what they're referring to. Yeah, the 10-year crediting period.
Sure. I mean, there really isn't a reason like not to. Our crediting period that is under our eligibility, so we would reassess if the well is still eligible. So if there are any regulations that have changed or other components, that may be a reason that it would not be renewed, but there's no reason, I don't think, on the project developer's side.
Yeah, and the crediting period to clarify is the 10-year unit that is comprised of reporting periods, which is what each the unit of time that verification is assessed. Next question. Anonymous asks, will credits be issued annually or upfront based on an expected curve?
Yeah, that's a question that we have for the technical work group, and we'll need to make a decision on when developing the protocol. Right now, we know that there are options and different motivations to go with either option that I laid out. So, one option is providing the entirety of the credits at the start of the project, which has been done in other protocols or methodologies. But we will be reviewing what those risks are and if we can overcome those risks or not. And dependent on that, it may be a different approach in terms of the credit timing or conversion of credits. Robin, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that topic at all, but I think the short answer is that that is an option, but we'll be discussing it with the technical work group.
Yeah, that's I think the correct answer. It's to be determined.
Great. Next question. Anonymous asks, how do reporting periods come into play if all the credits are issued up front?
It's a good question. I think that we would still want to see like monitoring of the well and the plug to bring assurance that it is still plugged and there aren't emissions, leaking, or any other issues with the project. So I would imagine even if we did take that approach, which we haven't determined we would yet in terms of crediting all of the credits at the start of the project, there would still be some monitoring requirements that would be reviewed within reporting periods. And again, that period of time would be discussed based on the crediting approach.
Okay. Arjun Patney asks, how do you plan to assess reduced fuel consumption by vehicles?
Sorry, Jordan, can you repeat that?
Yeah. Arjun Patney asks, how do you plan to assess reduced fuel consumption by vehicles?
Sure. So yeah, I mean the baseline SSRs, the sources, sinks, and reservoirs right now have transportation, I think, included of transporting the oil and gas to the end user. So if that was considered as a part of the baseline emissions in the GHG boundary, and then there was not that transportation of the product because the well is plugged and there isn't sale and distribution of product, then that would account for the difference between the baseline and the project for transportation. Again, those details need to be reviewed by the work group and solidified, but if there are any actions that are happening in the baseline that would no longer happen as a result of the project, then with having that in the baseline and not the project, you would be getting credit for that change.
Okay. Next question. Meg Coleman asks, how will you determine when the end of economic life is? Will you use an average of well life in the immediate area?
That's a really good question, something that we'll need to think more about. I know there has been some initial thinking around the reservoir, the reserves that are within the well itself that's a part of the project. So yes, that's a good question. I think that there's options, whether it's the exact well or the wells in a certain area, whether it's a county or another set area as to what the typical reserves of oil and gas are and what the lifetime or lifespan would be. Like with anything, we would, if we were taking, data from other sites outside of the project, we would want to ensure conservativeness and accuracy. So there may be a potential to um, yeah, find the most conservative average if that's what's needed and isn't available on a project by project basis.
Okay. Anonymous asks, how are you going to be able to certify that a well is marginal?
That's a really good question. I believe there's data out there and there would be, site visits within our program requirements. I think that the well would need to be able to demonstrate with documentation or maybe a trained certified professional third party. I don't know that goes out and checks off that well is operating, but only within the bounds of whatever we define as a marginal well that um, yeah, it's not producing more than that, and it's not orphaned or abandoned in terms of not producing. So that would be the first, check and eligibility that the well in question meets said definitions and is shown to meet that through some sort of check, whether it's documentation or certification or other means.
Anonymous asks, will market leakage and oil migration be included?
Yes. So, in terms of like leakage in the market, that is something that we would be considering. I did note on one of the slides that we have the opportunity to provide like a leakage uncertainty discount. So we will need to do an assessment of, basically the closure or decommissioning of a marginally producing well, although it doesn't significantly contribute to production to consumers, it does still contribute something. And so that will need to be considered to ensure that the projects don't result in leakage. And if there is uncertainty that there's a discount or deduction placed within the quantification for that.
Okay. Anonymous asks, when do you expect to do orphan wells?
Good question. We're quoting 3 to 6 months for development of this protocol. There's a slide after this to wrap up the webinar and provide more details on timelines that I'll get to after the Q&A session. We are aiming for an April board meeting review and publication for marginal wells. So I imagine it would be probably quickly after that in the late spring or summer of 2026 would be the first that we'd be looking at orphaned and or abandoned wells specifically. Although I will say, in talking to a number of stakeholders and experts, I think although we see these as two different protocols, there are a lot of similarities and things that will overlap. And so we're hopeful that we'll have a lot of information from this process that lends itself to any further process on orphaned or abandoned wells.
Anonymous asks, what factors drove the decision to exclude orphan wells?
Well, we haven't excluded them or haven't said that we wouldn't develop a protocol for orphaned or abandoned wells. We did somewhat of a high level, but hopefully comprehensive assessment of the two different well types in terms of their potential and their risks. And for various reasons, which we can share, we found that marginal wells were the priority and what we wanted to look at first. But we haven't excluded orphaned and abandoned wells, so it was simply which type of well did we want to develop first and why. And as mentioned, we have plans to consider orphaned and abandoned wells after development of the protocol for marginal wells.
Okay, the next question I believe we already answered. Who will the ultimate credit recipients be? We are still working that out, so I don't think we have a final answer on that right now. The next question, are there any rework events planned that contradict marginality?
Yeah, so for the work group, we will make that public when we've made decisions, hopefully early December. And can you repeat the next question, Jordan? Sorry.
Are there any rework events planned that contradict marginality?
To be honest, I don't know if Rachel, Rob, and others understand the basis of that question. I apologize. I don't know exactly what it's asking, so maybe the webinar attendee could add to the question in the chat.
Okay. Arjun Patney comments concern is leakage. Thank you for that comment, Arjun. And then next question. Thank you. Dan Arthur from All Consulting. Thank you for the presentation. And comments on work with the SEC as a great basis for the reserve analysis. Thank you for that comment, Dan. John Brook, reclamation of the oil and gas lease may include reclamation of tank battery sites as well as reclamation of the well site. Is tank battery and total lease reclamation going to be included in the protocol or only the well site?
Great question. Short answer is I don't know right now. Something we need to review. it's, yeah, come to our attention as we're launching development that, yeah, reclamation of the site is a question, and what would be required as a part of the project, or what would be potentially outside of that, or up, above and beyond, up to the project developer. That's a question that, yeah, we'll have to tackle and look at in more detail and determine what may or may not be required as a part of the project when it comes to, yeah, reclamation, I guess.
Okay, thanks. Seeing we have 5 minutes left, I think we should probably move on to wrapping up the end of the presentation, and we can get to all the questions and comments unanswered via email.
Sure. Thanks, Jordan. So yes, thank you again for your time. We put together this proposed development process and timeline for your information. Of course, these are tentative, they may change. These are our goals. So we are hosting, of course, right now the public scoping webinar today. We have a deadline of next Monday after the American Thanksgiving holiday, a deadline of December 1st at 5 p.m. To submit your statement of interest forms to be a part of the technical work group. We commit to doing a quick review of the forms that are submitted, and thank you if you've already submitted a form or plan to. And then we are going to take about a week's worth of time to go through who has put forward an application and select the members of the work group, get back to people and inform them of our decisions. And then we're hoping to hold our first work group meeting potentially before the end of your holiday season, if scheduling permits, or very early first week of January of the new year. We are targeting to meet an April 2026 publication deadline. We are targeting to try to go to a 30-day public comment period sometime in February, which leaves us some time before February to work with the technical work group, and sometime after that date to include and respond to public comments before presenting it to our board for final approval, like I mentioned, it potentially in April. And these are, of course, to be confirmed, but our proposed timelines. As mentioned, please submit a stakeholder form, a statement of interest form if you're interested in being a part of the technical work group. We really do value the technical work group and your expertise and input, so very much appreciate if you've already sent in a form or plan to. And they're both available on our development page. I think Jordan shared links in the chat, so if you don't have it, you should be able to get it through the chat link. For us, next steps will be establishing the work group, and then be communicating who is on and selected for the work group, and also trying to hold a first meeting in December that is open to the public and observers through our transparent process. So if you'd like to stay connected and informed but not participate on the work group, as Rachel mentioned, there are avenues and mechanisms for that for you. And our contact information, again, feel free to email myself at msmith@climateactionreserve.org as the development lead, or Rachel and Jordan are also supporting and are available at their email addresses there as well. And I believe that's the end of our deck. So thank you very much for your time. We greatly appreciate the attendance and excitement around this development, and we'll be in touch. Thank you again.